person, Marian Titians, who is 27 years old, and I, a 25-year-old female, have an infant son. We're overjoyed at being parents, but most of my in-laws refuse to even see our baby because of our decision concerning his name. My in-laws have a tradition of giving the firstborn son of every generation the same name. Let's say it's Peter. This has been going on for about 7 generations already, and they're very serious about it. My fiancé's eldest cousin was the latest person to get named Peter. Every one of his cousins has only had daughters so far, so our baby is the first son of his generation, and consequently should get the name. I have no problem with the name Peter, and I would have been okay with naming my son that. Unfortunately, that was also my uncle's name, who died before I was born. I won't get into details, but it was tragic and traumatizing for my family. My father never got over losing his younger brother. My grandmother asked the family not to name any of our future children Peter during her lifetime. My mother-in-law and father-in-law knew about this promise and at first seemed to be not only okay with us avoiding the name Peter, but also supportive of the one we chose. However, my grandmother sadly passed away when I was 7 months pregnant. We traveled for her funeral. As on our last days there, my in-laws called to offer me their condolences. Then my mother-in-law asked me if I would think about the name Peter now. Suddenly, they were insistent that the name we chose was awful, and we had to honor their tradition. And says according to them, they only had agreed to make an exception for us for my grandmother's sake and had no obligation to keep it now that she had passed. My family agrees that while we don't have to avoid the name anymore, it still doesn't feel right to use it. My fiancé also agrees with me, but his parents spent the last weeks of my pregnancy trying to convince us to change our minds about the name. When our baby was born and we named him what we wanted, my in-laws were furious that we had broken a 7-generation-old family tradition. Some of them hadn't previously wanted to name their sons Peter, but did it anyway for the family's sake. They said our decision was selfish and that my family should have moved on by now. This has nothing to do with whether my family's moved on. It just felt like a betrayal of my grandmother and uncle's memories to even consider using the name. My father-in-law offered us $1,000 to change our son's name to Peter after he was born. That was 2 months ago, and neither of my fiancé's parents have met the baby or seen us since I was pregnant. Most of my in-laws are on their side, and this is causing a huge rift between my fiancé and his family. He assures me he's fine, but I'm starting to feel really guilty. I feel really guilty about this. Am I the idiot? The tradition started, as far as I know, when old Peter died and his son, also named Peter, named his firstborn after his father. Peter I had the first son of the following generation and did the same thing. That one died before having children, so his sister gave the name to her son, and so on. The name Peter is very common in my country, and none of them ever get bullied over it. And the fact that it was also my uncle's name isn't as unlikely as one might think. Luxury middle names aren't used in my country, but most people get the maternal surname before the paternal one instead. Some hadn't wanted to name their kid, but did it for the family's sake. Have you broken a pact with Satan or something? Aren't the idiot? The family name traditions are weird. You can do whatever you want and name your baby. Keep pushing the I'm easy tea. Pushing that I'm honoring my late grandmother's final wishes hard, so they see how unhinged they sound asking you to flout this. Lunatics should never be around babies, or kids, or me, or you. Seriously, do you live on the set of Dynasty? Also, as a grandma, the idea of rejecting a child based on a name is simply trifling. It's downright shallow, petty, and a horrid representation of one's integrity. Honestly, the longer these people avoid my child, the less their value would be worth in my child's life. Who would want such people around after a while? What would they bring to the table for my child? How would people like this positively enrich their development? I feel bad for Oak's partner, as this behavior surely has hurt him. As an aside, once again, tradition is a euphemism for misogyny. Note: only male children have a special name, and all the female children were not fought over. Presumably, no one cared what they were called. But all the more reason to end this now. Update. Am I the idiot for breaking my fiancé's family tradition by naming my son what I wanted? Thank you so much to everyone who commented and offered support. A lot has happened since, so I'd like to give you an update. Perhaps about a week after my post, my fiancé parents contacted us. They apologized for their behavior and begged me to meet my son. They said they were ready to leave the naming debacle behind and truly wanted to be involved in their grandson's life. We were skeptical, but invited them over to meet the baby. The visit went well. They began coming over almost every day during the next 3 weeks. I noticed neither of them ever called my son by his name, but I didn't point it out. Things seemed good for the first time in months between my fiancé and his parents. One day, my fiancé helping my father-in-law with something at our place, so my mother-in-law and I went to the park with my baby. I had to go to the bathroom sometime later, so I left him in the stroller with her. When I returned, she was sitting on a park bench, chatting with a woman who was cooing over my son. So I went over there and introduced myself as son's name's mom. She said, "Oh, I thought his name was Peter." I didn't say a word, and neither did my mother-in-law. She followed me to the car and we went back to my apartment. But on the way there, I texted my fiancé about what had happened. When we arrived, he kicked both his parents out of our place. Had read my text and confronted his father. Thankfully, my father-in-law is a terrible liar and confessed immediately. Apparently, both my in-laws only call my son Peter whenever they're talking about him, every time they introduce him to someone else, and even when baby talking to him on the few occasions that they were left alone with him. Neither of them is embarrassed by this and thinks they're in the right. So we're heartbroken, especially my fiancé. Not only because his parents can't let go of their pride, but also because the name we chose for our son means a lot to both of us. I blame myself for encouraging my fiancé to allow them near our son. I was raised in a different city than all my grandparents, and I always wished they could have been more involved in my life. Losing my grandmother didn't help, Pretty much every doubt I had only existed because I thought it would be important for my son to grow up with all of his parents around. But now all my guilt is gone. They don't deserve to be in his life if they can't respect my son enough to call him by his name. I hope they enjoyed the 3 weeks they had with their grandson, because that's all they're getting until they get their heads out of their butts. Yikes, are they this psychotic and unhinged about other things in life, or just this one issue? What a weird hill for them to die on. We can be grateful you found this out now, because if you play your cards right, by the time they see your son again, he'll know his name. According to my fiancé, they've always been a little entitled, but I never really saw them enough to be able to say that. When the lady from the park asked about his name, it did cross my mind that she might think I was a kidnapper. However, his name is written on one of his blankets, which calmed me down a little. Still, I can't help but think of what my mother-in-law would have done had the woman threatened to call the cops. I seriously can't wrap my head around this. It's they're throwing away a son, a grandson, future grandchildren, and a daughter-in-law, family members that some people would give anything to have. That's the real atrocity. That's something for them to feel ashamed about. That's literally so tacky and disgusting of them. I'm sure your husband is so embarrassed and ashamed that his family is being this way. He probably feels guilty but is so hurt. I'm so sorry, EOP. Wow, just wow. We recently moved in with my in-laws because I'm 31 weeks pregnant with our first child. And I feel like I need my mother-in-law for support since I've been pretty terrified the entire third trimester and my parents don't live nearby. My husband didn't want to move in with them, and the only reason he did was that I told him I'd go without him, and he could stay in our home alone until after the baby's born. His parents are great and very close, so that's not why he didn't want to temporarily move in with them. At a piece of that worry, we fought about it a lot before we moved. We're still arguing about it now because he thinks it wasn't necessary. I'm stressing over nothing, which maybe I am, but that doesn't magically make the stress disappear. He said multiple times that I forced him to move here, but he could have stayed at our house like I said. I can't expect my mother-in-law to visit every day, and I feel better in a house with other people around. My husband does sometimes work from home, but he's usually holed up in his office, so it's like he's not here anyway. So this is better for me. Succeeding, my in-laws are more than happy to have us here, but my husband is still sulking and gives me an annoyed look whenever his parents say something about his habits that he doesn't like. Am I the idiot? You are the idiot. Did you consider that there may be a reason your husband doesn't want to live with his mother? Also, dropping do this or I'm leaving in a marriage is unhealthy. Not only do this or I'm leaving, but it's also do this or I'm leaving with your unborn child and won't be back until after their birth. What a crappy ultimatum. Understandable that you want support, but to upheave the entire household and move in with in-laws just because, sorry, but that's the nuclear option in marriage. What do you say if he says fine, and then you don't get his mother because you left him? Everyone around you has to change their lives around because you're afraid of what exactly? Grow up, lady. You decided to have a child, not them. You're self-centered, entitled attitude is out of control. I talked to a therapist about anxiety, as it can and might only get worse from here. Your doctor must be informed that you moved into your in-laws' house because you're too scared to be alone for labor or when the baby comes. I disagree. Hope's not the idiot. When people ask for help, they're the bad guy or girl. When they don't, they're also the bad guy or girl. What the heck do you people want? She said she needed and wanted help, and that she'd like to stay with her mother-in-law because they would be happy to help. She's happy to help. Why is this a problem? If this was her own mother, would anyone blink an eye? Childbirth is a big deal. It's natural to feel some anxiety as a first-time mom. How fortunate that she has supportive in-laws and a good relationship with her mother-in-law. My wife, 31 female, and I, 36 male, have been married for 2 years now, and she has a very regimented wellness and mindfulness routine. She wakes up at 5 a.m., does yoga in the spare room, goes on a quick run, and comes home to make a smoothie using one of those loud Nutri-Ninja blenders, and will get on with her day. She also meditates in their journals and does other things that I can't disrupt because it's her personal time. She was like this before I met her, and it was clear that if I wasn't on board with this aspect of her routine, she didn't want to pursue anything with me. While I'm not thrilled she has the whole room for herself, I did ask if I could put my PC in there so it's not in the dining room space. It was there before I moved in with her, so I made my peace with it. My sister's coming to town with her partner and young daughter, who is young grammar school age. We both agreed to let them stay with us to save money. My wife wants them to sleep in the living room because we have multiple comfortable sofas for them to sleep on. While there was enough room, I made my case for buying air mattresses for them and setting them up in my wife's spare room. I also asked her if she would part with her smoothie making, at least until they wake up so they aren't disturbed in the morning. My wife is vehemently opposed to giving up her room and smoothies. She doesn't think the room will be comfortable for them. Though carpets, and it's got huge windows and massive mirrors on one wall. And she says that if I'm using this situation to disrupt her routine, which I apparently hate, I'm not sure where she got that from since I've never asked her to change it. We're in for a disagreement over where they should stay. And my wife is even threatening to not allow them to stay and have them get a hotel for the visit. I don't think giving up the room is that hard to ask for my family's comfort, and it's only 3 days. As someone who's currently in the throes of a deep, dark depression, I feel like your wife's routine was possibly born out of an absolute necessity, and that it may be the thing that keeps her functional. I would say that she was very clear with you about how important her routine was, so I think you are the idiot for wanting her to change it. I do also understand that she may be seen as non-accommodating, but it was never a secret. Things that look selfish are more than what they seem from the outside. I don't care if he agreed. Just anyone who needs to run a blender early in the morning with guests is selfish and needs therapy to work through their issues. She needs to work through her issues in therapy. Dominating an environment and being unable to care for others is a big issue. Also, people can readjust their positions and evolve over time. Then the guest should stay in a hotel. They can also readjust their positions. She made it clear she has a routine. She's trying to work with you by letting them stay with y'all, but you're so desperate to interrupt a routine that's somehow bugging you that you refuse to see it. Perhaps you should ask yourself why you are so resentful of this routine. Is it because it's her time with herself and she isn't paying attention to you? Or because you're jealous that you don't have that same dedicated time allotted for you to have your time? Look at yourself and figure it out soon. Update. Thank you for all the advice, everyone. I've decided not to push this issue any further with my wife, and my sister and family can use the sofas, or I'll pay partly for a hotel for them. I do plan on asking my wife about her routine. She thinks that because the living room and kitchen are separated by a room, there's no need to muffle the blender sound on top of what we already do with the insulation pads and a shut door. My wife, who's 28, has recently gone back to work after a long break following our daughter's kindergarten. She's experienced a few hard days at work. Exentegnet, who is 32 and female, thought it might lift her mood up a little bit if I cooked something for her with the help of our little one. We made our dining room into a restaurant. I got us both chef hats and matching aprons, and we cooked. While cooking, we made a bit of a mess in the kitchen. We were almost done when I got a call from her. She said her mom, my mother-in-law, who lives in a different state and we barely see each other, had come to pay a visit and asked me to prepare the guest room if I could, and said she'd be home shortly, so I panicked and couldn't clean up before they arrived. They came home to a messy kitchen and my daughter acting as a restaurant manager. My wife adored the whole thing, but her mom immediately said how we lived with all this mess was disappointing. She said serving someone food like this in their home was ridiculous and made fun of the process. My wife told me to just let it go. But somehow I felt like a huge idiot because the timing could not be worse. And my wife and I stayed up cleaning the mess that night. Her mother-in-law is the idiot with no notice. What was it? A surprise inspection. You did something wonderful with your daughter, and she'll always remember it. Your wife isn't upset. She has more love for you because you did it. Mother-in-law can stay at Motel 6. Motel 6 sounds like an appropriate punishment. Do you know what is ridiculous? People showing up unannounced, staying for the night and daring to complain and mock you and your kid. Perhaps she'd be happier somewhere else, like her state. For an idiot. What kind of relationship does your wife have with her mother, that even though the mother-in-law lives in a different state, and you had zero notice she was showing up, I would not be cool with that at all. Your mother-in-law being judgmental and rude blows my mind. Cooking makes things messy, and she was a last-minute guest. Not to mention the restaurant thing is adorable. Oh honey, your mother-in-law needs a reality check.